Hello everyone. So today we are going to learn about the basal ganglia. This topic seems very complex, but we will try to simplify as much as possible. See, this is the basal ganglia, which is the misnomer actually. It should be called as the basal nuclei. It is the subcortical group of the nuclei present in the brain, and it includes different group of nucleus. So let us see the subdivisions now. These are the subdivisions. So first of all we will see about the neostratum. Neostratum consists of the caudate nucleus and putamen. These are also just known as the striatum or dorsal striatum, and also it can be the ventral striatum can be nucleus that is included in this, just because if somebody asks us neostratum, we have to say this caudate and putamen, but also we can include this ventral striatum, nucleus accumbens and olfactory tubercle, which together works in the mesolimbic pathway. Anyways, let's move on. We have paleostratum. Usually striatum, the word striatum means striated or striped, which means the grayish and whitish color will appear striped. In the brain, if you cut the section, we will see the appearance of the structures in different color, gray or white. That makes them striated. That's why they are called as a striatum group. So we have paleostratum. So pallidus, pale. This is a pale looking nucleus, slightly yellowish or grayish one. So we have this globus pallidus, which is divided into externus and internus as well. So on the basis of this output or input, we will decide the pathway is direct or indirect. If the striatum, this striatum receives the stimulus from the cortex and that striatum gives it to the externus, then that is the indirect pathway, and striatum if gives the output to this internus, then we can call it the direct pathway. So now let's move on. The another one is the substantia nigra, and this includes the pars reticularis and compacta. This releases dopamine and this releases the GABA. We will further see about these structures. And then we have the subthalamic nuclei located slightly below to the thalamus, and it also functions in this basal ganglia, forming the circuit, helps in the. And let us see, just list the clinical aspect or significance of knowing this and learning this is that if anything is altered, any circuit or any part of this nucleus or basal ganglia is altered, then the hypokinetic or hyperkinetic movement disorders can occur, because basal ganglia major functions as the motor activity. Its major function is in motor activity. So this is the reason we will have the disorders of hypokinetic either or hyperkinesia, which can be also, we can also see the Parkinson's disease as one of the disturbance in the dopaminergic pathway of the basal ganglia through the nigrostriatal pathway. So in hyperkinetic movement we have this Huntington's disease, dystonia, hemibalismus, etc. We can learn it details in the books as well. Now let us try to cover the core concept of the pathways actually, and just let us see slightly how these are located. So basal ganglia, group of nuclei located in the brain. It is located at the base of the brain. This is just like in the midbrain, below the forebrain, above the midbrain actually, and located in the basal part of the brain, which consists of this caudate nucleus, which is like see, this is the head starting, and this is the body, which is thin and cylindrical and ending to the tail and attached to the amygdaloid nucleus, which is mesolimbic or which is related to the limbic system. Now then we have this lentiform nucleus, which is a wedge shaped nucleus present below, and this caudate nucleus attached to this structure. I know this structure is not much symmetrical actually, but this has been drawn to just to represent you the structure, represent you just about the type of structure we are drawing. So this is the caudate nucleus, this is a lentiform nucleus. Now caudate nucleus is and along with the lentiform nucleus further consists of this putamen and globus pallidus. Putamen is the most lateral structure, which is very darker in color, and then pallidus, which is the pale in color, and it is located medially, and globus pallidus is further divided into globus pallidus externus and globus pallidus internus. We have already seen in the previous video. And then we have the formation of a striatum. So caudate nucleus and lentiform nucleus usually form the dorsal striatum. but usually nowadays we call it just a striatum, or that is the neostriatum, which is usually formed by the caudate nucleus and putamen. But in circuit flow we will consider just putamen as the striatum, just to make it easier. Then we have this section. This is the frontal section of this brain. This is the frontal view, in which we will see the structure of these nuclei located. See, this is the corpus callosum, which joins the two sections or hemispheres of the cortex, and then this is the, here we will see the location of the ventricle, first and second ventricle, that is lateral ventricles, and then third ventricle. Then we have this thalamus and thalamus, the lateral to the thalamus or below we have the subthalamic nuclei and substantia nigra with the pars reticularis and pars compacta. Then after we have this nucleus accumbens, and this is the olfactory tubercle which forms this ventral striatum. So we do not right now have to learn much about this, but just to know this forms the ventral striatum. Then we have lateral to the ventricles the caudate nucleus. If we cut like this and we will view it from the frontal side, then such kind of appearance might be seen in the hemisphere, that is cerebral hemisphere. So this is the caudate nucleus, and lateral to it and slightly below or attached to it like this we can see this. We have this putamen most lateral structure and globus pallidus externus and internus slightly medially. Then we already saw these structures. So these are these structures, this mass, the subcortical mass, this subcortical mass is known as the basal nuclei, as we should call it the basal nuclei. Now we have these structures connecting through each other and making different circuits. Actually all these structures will have different afferent and different efferent, but just for the motor activity we have to consider few limited circuits, and then we have to study, and let us see that how these nucleus connects to each other, how the circuits are formed now. And that is the connection usually occurs through the neurotransmitters, and there are two major neurotransmitters which are glutamate and GABA. So glutamate is usually excitatory, we all know that very well, and GABA is the inhibitory. Now at the end of the cortico-cortical pathway from the cortex back to the cortex, the circuit is formed in all the types of this direct and indirect, cortex, from cortex to the cortex back to it, that is end result would be usually excitatory. But the reason is how we call it the excitatory to the direct pathway and how we call it inhibitory to the indirect pathway is that on the basis of modulation only. Just the excitation and inhibition depends upon the modulation, how much and what amount, at what amount the pathway is being inhibited. If more inhibited, it will be called as the excitation is inhibited in more amount, that will be inhibitory, and just excitation is inhibited in very less amount, just disinhibition occurs, so that is called as the excitatory. Now cortex, so thalamus releases glutamate again back to the cortex, and cortex releases glutamate back to this striatum, and striatum releases GABA to either to the globus pallidus externus, which will be called as indirect pathway, either and or to the globus pallidus internus, which will be called as the direct pathway. And all these structures releases again GABA to the further structures, and then to the thalamus, back to the thalamus, thus forming a circuit. Now let us see, GABA is the inhibitory through the GABAergic pathway, and glutamate is excitatory through the glutaminergic pathway. Now let us see in here, it's like very small diagram, but let us try to see and focus in here. So first of all, this is the motor, suppose this is a motor cortex that will be ruling or such as activating the motor activity. Then we have this motor cortex gives the input, the excitatory glutaminergic pathway, and it excites the striatum. Striatum now gives the its inhibitory impulse, because we already saw here striatum releases GABA. As cortex is releasing glutamate, it excites in much, the striatum is excited in more amount, and the more the striatum is excited, the more GABA is released to the globus pallidus internus. This is the globus pallidus internus here, and this globus pallidus internus also releases the GABA, which is in less amount. As striatum is inhibiting this internus, then its function will be less or decreased, so less GABA is released to the thalamus. Also, so major pathway is the subthalamic, this striatum to globus pallidus internus to thalamus, and thalamus again releasing its excitatory, because it is less inhibited, so it will release more glutamate, and thus the cortex will be activated or its action will be turned on, and that will be called as the excitatory pathway, and all the motor activities which were going on will be coordinated and initiated and would be regulated in a very better way. And for the regulation of this movement also, we have another the striatum gives its impulse to the pars reticularis, the pars reticularis of the substantia nigra. So it is more excited by the cortical impulse, which releases more GABA to the reticularis, and reticularis also releases the GABA to the thalamus, which is now decreased due to the inhibition from the striatum. So at the end, outcome is that thalamus is very less inhibited, and then it gives the excitatory, and that comes to our direct pathway, that is called to be direct pathway or direct circuit. And then we have this inhibitory circuit. Why do we call it inhibitory is, let us see. Motor cortex gives it impulse to the thalamus, which is excitatory. This is the striatum. Now cortex gives its impulse to the striatum. Striatum then gives its impulse to the globus pallidus externus. Then globus pallidus externus gives its impulse to the subthalamic nuclei, not to the internus. See, so this subthalamic nuclei now gives, see, this is the striatum, this is getting excited, it will release more GABA to the globus pallidus externus, which will inhibit the globus pallidus externus, and globus pallidus will release very less GABA to this subthalamic nuclei, due to which less inhibition occurs in this subthalamic nuclei, and it will release more glutamate to the globus pallidus internus, that is connecting it to the indirect. So globus pallidus internus is now being like more excited, so this is the more excitation through the subthalamic nuclei. So it was less inhibited, more glutamate is released to the globus pallidus internus. As globus pallidus excited in more amount, internus is, this is the globus pallidus internus, it is now excited in more amount, then it will release more GABA to the thalamus, So if more GABA is released, thalamus is inhibited, and thus thalamus is inhibited, thus its pathway, which was very much excitatory, will release a less glutamate, and that is slightly inhibitory, that is inhibits in larger amount, and that's why this pathway is called as inhibitory, which inhibits the unwanted movement in our body, or turn down the motor activity in the body which is going on, unwanted movement turn down. So this is the function of indirect pathway, and this is the direct and indirect pathway. So in this we clearly saw the direct and indirect connections. Now we have this pars compacta in the substantia nigra, which secretes its dopamine or gives the dopamine to the striatum through the forming the nigrostriatal pathway. And to the direct pathway, as it consists of the dopamine receptor D1, it will be acting as excitatory, which means it will stimulate more activity of the this direct pathway. And we have this dopamine 2 receptor, D2 receptor in this indirect circuit, which the compacta is releasing its dopamine directly to this striatum and act as inhibitory. It means it is inhibiting the inhibitory activity. Inhibitory activity was unwanted movement were turned down, and if the substantia nigra is acting through D2, then it will inhibit its activity in the indirect circuit, and it will such as promote this unwanted movement. So and similarly there is indirect role of acetylcholine, and we will study that in a different topic, that is whole lot of a different big concept in the Parkinson's disease itself. So this is the direct and indirect circuit, and just to take an overview, we can just see this. We have the same diagram: cortex releasing glutamate, activating the striatum. Striatum will giving its inhibitory impulse to the globus pallidus. As it is inhibited, it will release less GABA to the thalamus, more activity. So if in exams we are asked, we can draw this much only. This reticularis and substantia nigra is not much necessary to show if it is asked only about the direct or indirect pathway. And similarly, we have the similar diagram, just to circuit in the form of a flow chart. So striatum, globus pallidus externus, externus to the subthalamic nuclei to the globus pallidus internus. Just these two are added in this, and globus pallidus externus. This globus pallidus externus and subthalamic nuclei are added. Other is the same as the direct pathway, and at the outcome, as its outcome due to the addition of this globus pallidus externus and subthalamic nuclei, at the end it is giving the inhibitory activity. This pathway gives the inhibitory activity, and this pathway gives the excitatory activity. So this much for today for the basal ganglia. For any kind of confusion, please do comment below, and just subscribe to this channel. Thank you so much.